I still have the plastic bracelet. It's in the top drawer of my nightstand, in a coffee can with my father's watch and a key to a truck I sold in 1994. Toledo Mercy, admitted the 9th of March, discharged the 18th. My name printed crooked. I keep it because I was still wearing it that night, under my shirt cuff, and because everything I understood about my family turned out to be wrong while that little band of plastic was sitting against my wrist. They threw me a party. That's the part I want you to hold on to, friends, because it matters later. Nobody dragged me anywhere. My son rented the back room at Sandpiper Ridge, the golf club out on Route 20 where I'd never once golfed in my life, and he called it a welcome home. 31 people. A cake from the Good Bakery in Perrysburg. A banner over the doors that said "Welcome Home Ray," in letters somebody had cut out by hand. I remember the room smelled like chafing dish steam and carpet cleaner. I remember the light coming through the west windows the color of weak tea, and how it lay across the white tablecloths in long stripes. I remember that the water glasses had a chip of lemon in each one, and I remember thinking that Diane would have liked that, the lemon, because she noticed small nice things and I never did until she pointed at them. Diane was my wife for 41 years. She died 2 Februaries before that party. The death certificate said heart failure following a long decline. Long decline. 2 words that a doctor writes and a family repeats until it becomes furniture in the house, something you walk around without seeing. I was 68 days out from a triple bypass. I walked slow. I got winded crossing a parking lot. My hands shook a little in the mornings, which is a thing they tell you about and you don't believe until you're trying to button a cuff at 6 a.m. and your own fingers won't take instruction. My son Brad stood up at the head of the long table with a champagne flute. He's 38. He wore a charcoal jacket with no tie, which is how he dresses when he wants to look like money without looking like he tried. He owns a used luxury lot on Airport Highway. Owned? He has my jaw and his mother's eyes and a voice that fills a room without ever seeming to rise, and I was proud of that voice for a very long time. He thanked everybody for coming. He thanked the cardiac team. The cardiac team. He thanked his wife Chelsea for holding this family together while Ray was down, and 31 people applauded a woman who had been in my house maybe 4 times in 2 years. Then he turned toward me and his voice went warm and soft, the way you talk about a dog that's getting old. My dad built this whole life with his hands, he said. Furnaces and ductwork and crawl spaces. 40-some years of it. Nobody worked harder. But those hands don't work like they used to. So from here on out, somebody's got to hold the pen for him. Somebody's got to hold the pen for him, they laughed. I want you to understand the specific sound of it, because I've had a lot of nights to think about it since. It wasn't cruel laughter. That's what made it terrible. It was fond. It was the laughter of people who thought they were being let in on something tender, 31 good decent people from my church and my old crew and Diane's side of the family, all making that soft sympathetic noise you make at a man who is on his way out of his own life. My daughter-in-law reached over and patted the back of my hand and said, "It's okay, Ray," in a nurse's voice, and she isn't a nurse, she's a home health aide, and I've thought about that distinction more than any man should have to. My daughter Nora didn't laugh. She was 3 seats down with her water glass in both hands and her eyes on the tablecloth, and she didn't laugh and she didn't look up, and at the time I read that as embarrassment. I read it as my girl being ashamed of me. I sat there with my hands flat on the tablecloth feeling the cold weave of it, and I thought, even Nora. I smiled. I raised my glass an inch off the cloth. I let it go by, but something closed in me right then. It wasn't rage, friends. I've had rage. Rage is loud and it burns off. This was quiet, like a valve turning shut somewhere deep in a system, and afterward the pressure just goes somewhere else. Here's what 41 years of marriage and 43 years of work had taught me to believe about myself, that I was the one who handled things. Furnace out at 2 in the morning. In January, you call Ray. Transmission goes, you call Ray. Tuition short, wedding costs more than they said it would, down payment on the first house, $22,000 to open a car lot with a bank that wouldn't touch a 32-year-old with no collateral, you call Ray. I paid for a Disney honeymoon. I co-signed a lease on a building on Airport Highway. I never once said no, because I believed that was what a father was. A father is a man who fixes it. The Bluxer was a building and signed I, and sitting in that rented room under a homemade banner with my name on it, I finally understood what that had made me in their eyes. Not a man. A function, a signature, End quote. A pen that somebody else would soon be holding. The salad plates came and went. Then Brad slid a folder down the table to me. Navy blue, the kind with a lawyer's foil stamp in the corner, and he did it smiling, the way you'd pass somebody the rolls. Since everybody's here anyway, he said. Inside were 3 documents. A durable power of attorney naming Bradley Kessler as my attorney-in-fact for all financial matters. A quitclaim deed transferring the house on Cass Road, the house I built the addition on myself in 1988, into a holding company with a name I didn't recognize. And an amendment to my trust removing my wife Ruth as beneficiary and successor trustee. Ruth is 68. She's a retired school librarian from Sylvania with reading glasses on a chain and a laugh like a screen door. I married her 14 months after Diane died, and yes, I know how that sounds, and yes, I heard every version of the joke. What nobody in that room ever saw was Ruth at 3 in the morning on the 4th floor cardiac unit holding a plastic basin under my chin, telling me a story about a kid who used to hide in the library so his stepfather couldn't find him. Nobody saw her wash my hair in a hospital sink. They only saw a woman standing between them and a house. I looked up from the folder. Everybody was watching. That's when I understood there was no anyway about it. The room, the cake, the banner, the 31 witnesses, the friend of Brad's from the dealership standing near the coffee urn with a notary stamp in his jacket pocket. All of it built for this exact 90 seconds, with a man who'd had his chest cracked open 10 weeks earlier, in front of everyone he'd ever wanted to look good in front of. They didn't come to welcome me home. They came to watch me sign. Brad, I said, what is this? It's protection, Dad. He didn't sit down. Standing is a way of being the one who's right. You've been through a lot. The medications, the confusion. We just want it so that if something happens, there's no mess. That's all. There's no confusion. Chelsea leaned in on my other side and put her hand on my forearm again, right over the bracelet, and she said, gently, so gently, loud enough for the near half of the table, Ray, honey, you called me Diane on Tuesday. I never called her Diane. Not on Tuesday. Not ever. And here's the thing I need you to understand, because this is the part that scared me worse than the surgery had. I sat there for a second, and I actually checked. I went back through Tuesday in my head, looking for it. That's how fast it works. One sentence from a woman with a medical badge and I was searching my own mind for a hole she'd told me was there. I took out my glasses. I read all 3 documents through, front to back, while 31 people watched me and the ice melted in the water glasses. It took maybe 4 minutes. Nobody said a word. Then I reached into my inside jacket pocket and took out an envelope of my own. I'd had it since the Thursday before. I'm not going to tell you I knew all of it. I didn't. But a man who spent his life on service calls learns to read a system by its noise, and the noise around me had been wrong for months. Mail forwarded off my address. A password changed on the credit union account. My own son asking twice about a life insurance policy of his mother's that I hadn't thought about since the funeral. So I'd gone to see Dale Vetter, who did my company's books for 19 years and whose brother-in-law is an estate attorney in Bowling Green, and I'd had some paperwork drawn up. I brought it to my own party in my coat because I didn't have anywhere better to keep it. I set my envelope on top of his folder and slid the whole stack back up the table. That's a revocation, I said, of a power of attorney I signed in the hospital on March 11th, 2 days after surgery, which I don't recall signing and which I have now revoked as of Thursday morning, notarized, with copies filed at both banks and the credit union. That's also an amendment to the trust. Ruth remains successor trustee. The Cass Road property stays where it is. You could hear the kitchen doors swing behind us. The steam pans ticking. Somebody's chair leg squeaked and stopped. Brad's face went through 3 or 4 things very fast. I'd never seen the last one before, and I'd known him since he was 9 minutes old. You're making a mistake, he said. Maybe. It'll be mine. And then he detonated. And the man who came out of him was not the man who had been standing there 30 seconds before. You want to talk about mistakes? And his voice cracked open and filled that whole banquet room. You were in North Dakota, 14 months, Dad. You were on a pipeline job in North Dakota while Mom fell apart in that house and you couldn't be bothered to pick up a phone. She died alone and you were off making money you didn't need, and now you want to sit there and lecture me about protecting this family? You killed her. You killed her with that job, and now you're handing everything she worked for to some woman you met at a grief group. I want to be honest with you about what that did to me, because I've promised myself I'd be honest about all of it. It worked. Every word of it worked, because every word of it had a piece of true in it. I did take that contract. 14 months. 2019 into 2020. Watford City, North Dakota, because a man I'd carried for years defaulted on $86,000 he owed my company, and I was staring down the barrel of losing everything at 64 years old. I went because I thought going was how you take care of your family. And when I called home and I called friends, I called constantly. My son answered because Diane's phone kept giving her trouble, and he'd tell me she was resting. She was having a good stretch. She didn't want me to worry. She'd call me tomorrow. Sometimes I'd get a text from her number. Doing fine. Love you. Don't worry. I believed a son. That's the entire crime I committed, and I'll carry it in the ground with me. Chelsea stood up. She was crying, and I'll give her this much. She cried beautifully, the way people do when they've had practice. He isn't competent, she said, turning to the room. To my pastor, to my old foreman Gil, to Diane's sister. I've been in homes like this for 11 years. I know what this looks like. He's being manipulated, and this woman, she pointed down the table at Ruth, has isolated him from his own children since the day she got her hooks in. Ray, I love you. This is not you talking. That's the one that nearly finished me. Not the accusation about Diane. The other one. End quote. See, because when a licensed somebody stands up in front of 31 people and says a man's mind is gone, you can feel the room start to consider it. I watched it happen. I watched people I'd known for 30 years shift a quarter inch in their chairs and start to wonder whether poor Ray was all there. I opened my mouth to defend myself, and I couldn't think of a single thing to say that a confused man wouldn't also say. That's the trap. There's no answer to it. Every denial is a symptom. And the day. Then a chair went back hard enough to hit the wall. That's enough. My daughter, by 33 years old, 5'4", in a gray cardigan, an ICU nurse at St. Vincent's who has held people's ribs apart with her hands and who had said maybe 11 words all evening. She didn't shout it. She said it the way you'd say, clear at a bedside, and the room went dead. Nora walked past me to the AV cart in the corner where the family slideshow had been cycling all night, me at 26 on a roof, Diane in a maternity top in 1987, Brad in a cap and gown. She pulled the laptop cable out of it. She plugged in her phone. Sit down, she said to her brother, and something in her voice made him do it. The slideshow went black. Then a doorbell camera came up on that screen, 10 feet wide, the fisheye porch view of the house on Cass Road. Timestamp in the corner, the 14th of November 2019. 200 yards of North Dakota mud between me and that porch on the day it recorded. There's Brad, filling the frame, back to the camera, one hand on the storm door. And there's Diane in the doorway in a robe at 4 in the afternoon, and I hadn't seen her face in a year and a half, and it was the wrong face. Sunken. Grayed out. Her hair unwashed. My Diane, who wouldn't take the trash to the curb without lipstick. And my son's voice came out of the ceiling speakers of that golf club, perfectly clear, because doorbell cameras are built to be clear. I need the cottage, Mom. It's sitting there doing nothing, and I've got a note coming due. Sign it over and I'll put you on the deed of the lot. It's the same money. It was my father's. It goes to the kids. I am the kids. Bradley. Let me explain how this goes. Calm. Unhurried. He never once raised his voice. And that is the part of that recording that people at the trial couldn't stop talking about. Eno. Chelsea writes your chart. Chelsea reports what she sees. And what she's been seeing is a woman who won't take her meds, who wanders, who left the burner on twice, who called her daughter-in-law by her dead mother's name. That's already documented, Mom. Weeks of it. All I have to do is make one call and a county worker comes out and asks you what year it is and you tell them and they still take you because it's already in writing. Dad's in North Dakota. Nora's a 2-hour drive and works nights. Nobody's coming. So you can sign the cottage or you can spend the rest of your life in a locked memory unit in Fostoria. Your choice. Take your time. Then the screen door closes and the video ends and there is nothing in that room but the sound of a woman at table 4 starting to cry. Nobody moved. Since Gil, my foreman, 6'3", 71 years old, put both hands over his mouth. Nora tapped her phone again. There's a voicemail, she said. January 11th, 2020. She left it on my phone at 3:40 in the morning. I've had it for 6 years. And then, my wife spoke in that room. Nora? Honey, it's Mom. Don't call back. He looks at it in the morning. I just needed to hear a voice. A long pause with breathing in it. Sweetheart, something's wrong with the vitamins. She brings them Sundays in the little plastic strip and she stands there while I take them, and about an hour later the room goes sideways, like standing up in a boat, and I can't find words. Yesterday I couldn't think of the word for spoon. Nora, I know what a spoon is, and she writes it all down. I've seen her writing it down. Another pause. Longer. I'm not calling your father. Don't you dare call your father. Because he'd have to choose between me and Bradley, and I already know how that goes, and I'd rather have this than watch him do it. Her voice broke and steadied, that way she had. I'm going to figure it out myself. I always do. I always do. Love you, baby. Don't call back. The message ended. The screen went blue. I don't have good words for what happened in my chest. Right then. It wasn't a heart thing. They checked, later, at the ER, and it wasn't. It was just my whole understanding of the last 6 years turning over like a truck going off an embankment, slow at first and then all at once. She'd been alone in that house being dismantled, and she chose it. She chose to be alone with it rather than make me choose. That's what my son had built. That's what he'd made of the woman who used to leave notes in my lunch pail. I stood up. Says, the room tilted a little and I put my knuckles on the tablecloth and I looked at my son, 38 years old. My jaw, his mother's eyes. Get out, I said. Dad. His face had come apart. He put a hand toward me. Dad, that video's got no context. You don't understand what that year was like. Get out of here. Dad, please. Now. They went. Chelsea first, snatching her purse, walking fast past the coffee urn with her chin up like a woman leaving a bad review. Brad's friend with the notary stamp had already gone out the service door. My son stopped in the doorway under the banner with my name on it and looked back, and I don't know what he was looking for. I turned my face away. I sat back down at the head of a table of 31 people and a sheet cake nobody had cut, and my daughter came and knelt beside my chair and put her forehead against my shoulder, and Ruth came around the other side and took my hand, and Gil stood up at the far end and started clearing plates because he didn't know what else in this world to do with himself. And again, you'd think that's the end. That's what I thought. He was gone, the truth was out, everybody had seen it with their own eyes. That was March. That was March. It didn't end until the following spring, and the worst of it hadn't even started. Because here's the question that got its hooks in me at about 2 the next morning, sitting in my kitchen on Cass Road with the lights off, and I suspect it's the same one that just got its hooks in you. Nora had that video for 6 years. She had that voicemail for 6 years. Her mother was alive for 11 months after that porch recording, so I asked her, not gently. I called her at 7 a.m., and I said it flat out, and I'm not proud of my tone. I said, you had it. You had all of it, and she died anyway. My daughter was quiet for a second, and then she said, Dad, come over. I want you to see something. She had a folder too. Everybody in my family had a folder that year. Adult Protective Services, Lucas County. Report of suspected abuse of an impaired adult, filed by Nora Kessler, RN, the 19th of November, 2019, 5 days after that porch video. Caseworker visited the residence November 26. Findings, unsubstantiated. Second report, filed the 3rd of February 2020. Caseworker visited February 7. Findings, unsubstantiated. Case closed. And a police report from Perrysburg Township. February 2020. Complainant reports possible medication tampering. No substance identified. Alleged victim declined to make a statement. No further action. They went out there twice, Nora said. Chelsea met them at the door in scrubs, with a med list and a chart. The house was spotless. Said. She'd been documenting for months. That was the whole point of the documenting, Dad. It wasn't for the doctors, it was for that doorstep. And Mom sat on the couch in front of the caseworker and said she was fine, because they had her by then. Because Brad had told her exactly what happens to a woman a county worker decides is confused. You could have told me. She made me promise. Nora's eyes went red, but her voice didn't move. She's her mother's daughter that way, and I'll be sorry about keeping that promise until the day I die. But Dad, I did tell you. I called you in Watford City in December of 2019 and I said, Mom isn't right and you need to come home. Do you remember what you said? I did. God help me, I did. I said, I know, honey, Brad's on top of it. I want to say something here to the men my age listening to this, and I mean it as plainly as I know how. There's a certain kind of us that built our whole idea of love out of provision, out of the check and the roof and the tuition and never once saying no. The Becks said, we told ourselves that was the deal, that a man's job is the outside of the house and somebody else handles the inside, and we didn't notice we'd made ourselves unreachable. My daughter told me. My wife tried to tell me, in her way, and stopped, because she'd already figured out what my answer would be. I was not fooled. I was available to be fooled. There's a difference, and it took me 2 years to be able to say it out loud. Nora and I took that folder and the video and the voicemail to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit named Alvarez the following Tuesday, and she listened to us for 40 minutes, and then she said the sentence that changed everything, which was your wife the kind of person who kept records? And I laughed, because Diane kept the receipt for a toaster oven from 1996. We drove to the house. And Nora went to the hall closet where the Christmas things are, and I went to the kitchen, and I stood in front of the cabinet by the stove where the recipe box had sat for 35 years, a green metal thing with a hinged lid, and I opened it. Behind the index cards, folded in half, was a spiral notebook, the kind you buy for 70 cents in August. She'd started it the 9th of October 2019. Every page in her handwriting, which got worse as it went and then got better again on the days she must have been clear. Son C. Brought strip, 2 white oval, 1 blue, took at 2:15, 3:30 room tilting. Lost the word for spoon. Son only took 1 white, palmed the other, put it in the pill bottle in my sewing basket. No tilting today. Read a whole magazine. 2's B. A. Says I gave him $4,000 in sept. I did not. Free told C. I feel better. She wrote it down and went out to her car and made a call. Son palmed both, kept them. Calming. In sept, 31 pages. And at the very back, taped to the inside cover of that 70-cent notebook, a snack bag with 11 pills in it. Some white, some blue. My wife, alone, at 64 years old, being told daily that her mind was going, ran a controlled experiment on herself and collected the evidence. For 11 months, nobody helped her. The last entry is the 30th of November 2020. It stops in the middle of a line. Ray comes home the 14th. When he gets here, I'm going to tell him everything. I'm going to sit him down at this table. And she died on the 2nd of December. She never got to. I sat down on my own kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher, and I stayed there a long time. Detective Alvarez had those 11 pills at the county lab within 72 hours. Lorazepam and a first-generation antipsychotic, neither one on any prescription list any doctor ever gave Diane Kessler. The dosing pattern in that notebook lined up with Chelsea's own visit logs, which she'd submitted to her agency for billing, which is the kind of thing a person does when they're certain nobody will ever put the 2 documents side by side. I'm going to tell you exactly how it came out, because I've sat through enough of these stories where the ending goes vague right when you want the numbers, and I don't intend to do that to you. It took 14 months. Chelsea Kessler pled first, in the fall, and the plea was the thing that broke my son's case. Her aid license was permanently revoked by the state board. She got 4 years for felony patient abuse and complicity to theft from a person in a protected class, and she is currently doing them in Marysville. Brad went to trial and lost. Financial exploitation of an elder, forgery, and theft from a protected class. The forgery count because that power of attorney I signed on March 11th, 2 days out from a bypass, had my name on it in handwriting that a document examiner testified under oath was not mine and had my son's friend's notary stamp on it. 11 years. He'll be 51. The lake cottage in Michigan, which he had in fact gotten her to sign over 8 weeks before she died, was voided by the probate court as a product of undue influence and went back into her estate. The $400,000 life insurance policy, the one he'd changed the beneficiary on in 2019, the one he'd asked me about twice, The one that was the whole engine of everything. The insurer clawed it back. He'd already spent about $260,000 of it. The dealership on Airport Highway is a vape shop now. I drive past it about once a month. His debts, by the way, since a lot of people ask me how a man does this to his own mother, $212,000 in personal guarantees on floor plan financing, due in 90 days, with a wife who liked the house they were renting in Ottawa Hills. That's the whole arithmetic. That's what my wife's mind was worth on the open market. $212,000 and a lease. I visited him twice. I'm not going to pretend I know what I was looking for. The second time he told me that he'd never meant for her to die, that he only meant to scare her into signing, and that when she went he was as shocked as anybody. And I sat there on my side of that table and I realized I believed him, and that it didn't help even slightly, because a man who is only willing to destroy his mother's mind and not her body still ends up with a dead mother. I haven't been back. Nora hasn't gone at all. What Diane's estate ended up doing was this. Half to Nora, who didn't want it and took it anyway because I made her. And the other half went to a fund at the county senior center, in her name, that pays for exactly one thing. An independent nurse assessment for any older adult in Lucas County whose family says they're confused. No cost. No referral needed. Any neighbor can call. It's not a lot of money and it doesn't fix anything, and last year it paid for 81 assessments and 2 of those became APS cases that got substantiated. We opened the cottage that June. First time in 7 years. There's a smell that a closed-up lake house has, mildew and old lake and cedar, and Ruth stood in the doorway and said, "Well, this is going to take a week," and rolled her sleeves up, and Nora carried the storm windows out to the shed. I put Diane's green recipe box on the kitchen counter where it belongs, and it's still there, and the notebook is in a fireproof box in my closet because a court told me to keep it. I sat on that dock in the evening with my feet in cold water, and I thought about a man standing at the head of a table saying that somebody had to hold the pen for me. And here's the thing, friends. He was right in a way he never intended. Somebody had been holding the pen for years, signing things in a hospital room, answering a phone that wasn't his, writing in a chart what a frightened woman was supposed to be, deciding what I was allowed to know about my own wife's last winter. The only person in that whole story who ever picked up a pen and used it honestly was Diane, alone at that kitchen table with a 70-cent notebook, writing down the truth in her own hand on the days she could still find the words. She's the one who convicted them, not me, not the lawyers, her. So if you take one thing from an old furnace man who missed everything that mattered, when somebody starts telling you that a person you love is confused, ask who benefits from that being true. Ask what happens to the money if it's true. And if a woman you've been married to for 41 years ever says she doesn't want to worry, you go home. Get on a plane, quit the job, lose the money, go home. I'm 73 now. My hands still shake in the mornings. I button my own cuffs. It just takes a while. And I do all my own signing. The